Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today I'd like to talk to you about psychic healing. It's a term that has many different names. It could be thought of as healing intentionality. It could be thought of as spiritual healing or mental healing or the projection of positive thoughts and positive energy. There are many words for it, but it boils down to this, I think. When you're on a spiritual path, in the sense that you're opening up to the possibility that your thoughts can reach out beyond your brain, beyond your nervous system, beyond your body, and have a direct impact in the world at large, sometimes we call that psychokinesis, or perhaps even through telepathy. Some people think that mental healing is a question of telepathic suggestion. In any case, when you're on the path and you're opening up and you feel positive about yourself, it's natural to project positive healing intentions towards other people, and not even just people, but other living creatures. Pets, animals, plants, the world at large. Now, I've talked about healing, at least briefly, through many of the previous editions and episodes of the InPresence series. I talked about, for example, my friend Lynn Hirschman, who had a brain tumor and was dramatically healed from that. The research on healing is very solid, and at this point there are hundreds of double-blind experimental studies showing that healing intentionality works at a distance. You don't have to be in the same room or in the same place. And a good overview of that research is now available to you, because in previous editions of InPresence, I've provided links to my first book, The Roots of Consciousness, which surveys a lot of the early research on healing. And I think it's fair to say that subsequent research has validated the early work. Now, there's one thing about healing that's worth paying attention to, and that is what's sometimes called the brown thumb effect. Years ago, various researchers, Carol Nash and I believe Bernard Grad at McGill University in Montreal, did healing studies, and they chose people who weren't professional healers. In fact, just the opposite. They were people who were depressed, and they had them working on plants to heal plants. And what they found is when people are feeling bad about themselves, when they're full of anxiety and negative thoughts and feelings toward themselves, when they attempted to direct healing energy, healing thoughts, healing intentionality, the result was the opposite, that their own inner feelings of negativity seemed to be projected out onto the plants, in this case, that were the objects that were being measured for healing intentionality by the researchers. So healing is something that should only be done when you're feeling good about yourself. If you're not feeling good about yourself, well, then the obvious thing that you want to do is be receptive to healing. Open yourself up to receive healing, not to send. And I find that healing is something for me that comes natural. And here's how it works for me. It happens often at night. If I can't sleep, if I wake up in the middle of the night, or I'm having a hard time falling asleep. So in effect, I'm wide awake, I'm in bed, I'm comfortable, I'm relaxed, I have time on my hands until I might fall asleep again. For me, that's a perfect opportunity to extend healing thoughts. And I usually start with myself. I've got one or two places almost always in my body that could use a little healing, and that's where I start. And then I extend healing thoughts to people who are the closest to me, members of my family. And then, if I'm still awake, I extend healing thoughts to other people who are close to me, friends, colleagues, associates, people I know or know about, and perhaps then I'll begin to think about it in a wider context. Perhaps I've learned about some crisis that's occurred in the news where many people are under stress, and I'll direct healing thoughts there. Sometimes I let my thinking expand, as I did in the exercise with you, the Healing Our Planet Ourselves videotape or video exercise. We don't use tape anymore for these things, although it was originally an audio tape. Now it's a video file. But those of you who listened to the third segment, as I recall, of the InPresence series, all should have the link to that 40-minute exercise, a guided meditation. So there are many different techniques available to you for practicing healing, both in the Roots of Consciousness and in the guided meditation tape itself. And you can allow your healing thoughts to extend out. I sometimes enter into a state where I feel as if I'm directing healing thoughts to the entire universe, and even beyond, to what you could call the multiverse. And sometimes even beyond the multiverse, extending healing to God herself, himself, herself, itself, to levels of being even beyond any multiverses. Now, I can tell you this about healing. I feel sometimes I enter into an altered state of consciousness, and I'm sure many of you do too, where it just feels like, wow, something is happening here, like there's energy flowing. I'm entering into an altered state of consciousness, and it feels very real and very substantial, even if the healing is being extended to the entire universe. And there are other times when I kind of am going through the motions, but nothing is happening. I might be repeating in my own mind the thought, heal, 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 but I don't feel like there's any healing happening. It's a subtle sense. Now, as a scientist, I have to say this. I don't know if it ever works. That is, when I'm doing it personally, because I'm not participating in a controlled experiment where I can make accurate measurements. Not at all. I am basing my activity on just my own good feelings and my positive intentions and my desire. It could be a healing prayer, for example, but for me, it's more a thought process, a process of mental activity or thoughts, thinking, rather than praying. Usually I'm not beseeching a deity or a higher power for healing, but actually, in the subtleties of the mind, there are many things that may be taking place. But here's what I think about it. Even though I can't validate it scientifically, there's no harm done. If I'm awake at night anyway, I consider this a really good way to spend time. I know other people, when they're awake at night, might turn on the television or take out a video game or, watch the news on their iPhone. There are many things that you can do with your time, but I think that when you're on a spiritual path, it's advantageous to spend your time sending out positive thoughts to the whole universe or any part of it maybe to just your own neighborhood, maybe to the animals and the plants in your own little corner of the world. But it's a question of maintaining a positive mental attitude, minimally speaking. And based on the empirical research, the hundreds of studies that have now been done on healing, I think you can have at least a modest amount of confidence that it might be having a real impact. I'd like to share with you one other notion about healing, and it's one I learned from the PK man, Ted Owens. Some of you who have been following my work know that I did a 10-year study with this individual who had remarkable psychokinetic abilities. And there are several videos that I have created with other researchers about that study that lasted from 1976 until his death in 1987. And in 1986, as I recall, I took the Ted Owens training. It's described in detail in my book, The PK Man. And one of the things that he recommended, and I thought it was maybe the best idea that I got from him, is this: that if you send healing energy to people toward whom you normally would direct negative energy, people you consider your enemies, people who are hostile to you, people who perhaps have a different political or religious viewpoint than you do, people that perhaps you go through your day thinking they're evil. If you send healing energy to those people, or healing intentions, healing thoughts directed toward those people, well, according to Ted Owens, you get extra karmic credits for doing so. So that's worth pondering. Now, I don't profess to be a professional healer. I certainly know some people who are, and I think it's a difficult path to follow. One reason being that if you're really good at it, the demand can be overwhelming for your services. But there are different organizations that teach healing. There are Reiki healers, there are Joe Ray healers, there are religious science healing practitioners. And I think all of these people are doing very, very good work. So if you're in need of healing, actually, there are groups of people and they get together on a daily basis. Some religious organizations have groups that are sending out healing thoughts on a 24-hour basis. They have healing lists, and you can request to have your name put on those lists. I think if you do a Google search, you'll come up with some of those. I know the Church of Religious Science, the Unity Church. Well, the Church of Religious Science is now known as the Centers for Spiritual Living. And I might mention parenthetically that for many, many years I've been teaching parapsychology to ministers in training with that organization. They're very good people, and even though I'm not a member of that church, I have the greatest respect for the work that they do. And it comes out of what you could call the New Thought movement, which is really an outgrowth of American transcendentalism of the 19th century. So there's a very strong healing tradition that you could call it at this point almost a folk tradition here in the United States. For those of you who are into healing, another thing I've learned on the internet, on Facebook, for example, there are many groups that are for what they call light workers. Well, what is a light worker but a person who is directing healing light, healing thoughts across the world. And I think you can all appreciate that the more healing thoughts that we can direct on this conflicted planet, the better it will be for everyone. And I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you for being with me.